His supporters have been waiting 10 years for this day. Laurent Gbagbo, basking in a hero's welcome, you might say, for his grand return to Abidjan. It took a brief rekindling of Ivory Coast's civil war to force out the former president when he refused to concede the 2010 election to current leader Alassane Ouattara. After the case against Gbagbo fell apart at the International Criminal Court, we'll ask about the terms and conditions of the return of a larger-than-life political figure and the two faces of a nation that's both a regional powerhouse with near double-digit growth, but where bottled-up resentment and rivalries have never been fully addressed. After the opposition's recent decision to take part in legislative elections, does the now 76-year-old Gbagbo's return signal an appeasement or kick off a new period of uncertainty? Today in the France 24 debate, the return of Laurent Gbagbo. Joining us from London, writer and artist Véronique Tadjo, whose novels include In the Company of Men. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Also with us, Maxime Ricard, West Africa researcher at the Institute for Strategic Research, IRSEM, and who did fieldwork on conflict resolution in Ivory Coast. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
France 24 correspondent Hanan Ferjani is where it's all happening at Abidjan International Airport, Félix Houphouët-Boigny Airport. Thanks for being with us, Hanan.
Thank you.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Yeah, it would take several shows to recount all the ups and downs of the one-time social studies teacher who embodied the fight for multi-party democracy in West Africa, who's known exile and jail time, whose presidency was marred by ethnically fueled civil war, and whose fiercely loyal followers stayed behind Laurent Gbagbo even when he was on trial at The Hague. Fraser Jackson has more.
March 31st, 2021, and the International Criminal Court upholds the decision to acquit Laurent Gbagbo of crimes against humanity.
The appeals chamber hereby revokes all remaining conditions on the release of Mr. Gbagbo as a result of this judgment.
Gbagbo is a free man and eyeing a return to the Ivory Coast, a move sanctioned by his rival and current Ivorian leader Alassane Ouattara. It is the long-standing conflict between the two men that is at the heart of the lengthy legal procedure which began back in January 2016. The events contained within the trial date back even further to late 2010. After a closely run presidential election, tensions rise between Gbagbo and Ouattara as the UN certified results are published by the Ivorian Electoral Commission.
Ouattara, Alassane, 54,10% des suffrages exprimés.
But these results are invalidated the next day by the Constitutional Council, which proclaims victory for Laurent Gbagbo. The uncertainty plunges the country into 5 months of chaos. Supporters of the two sides clash. The violence that ensues kills more than 3,000 people, yet Laurent Gbagbo doesn't concede an inch of ground. Along with his follower, Charles Blé Goudé, he stood accused of weaponizing rape and murder to terrorize his opponents. In April 2011, he was arrested with the help of the French army and transferred to The Hague, where he faced 4 counts of crimes against humanity, charges he denied. After a 3-year trial that heard 82 witnesses, evidence against Gbagbo and Blé Goudé was considered insufficient, and the two men were acquitted in January 2019, a decision upheld by the ICC's appeal chamber in 2021.
Hanan Ferjani, what's the latest at the airport?
Well, as you said, Francois, he really is basking in a hero's welcome. Although the turnout here at the presidential pavilion is not as big as one would expect, it's controlled because, as you know, the police forces really made sure that that the crowd here would be filtered and that only partisans, organizers, officials, the press could be here. Still, you can sense that electric atmosphere. We expected former President Laurent Gbagbo to come out from the main gate of the presidential pavilion pavilion, but in fact he came out of a side gate, and he had to basically really get into his car so that his car could really start parading through the presidential pavilion yard. And that's when, you know, people here started chanting and following his car around, and there was this like moment of a real excitement where you could hear people singing just minutes ago, singing "He is back, Woody, Woody," as they call him. So the excitement is very much here. And now it seems that as though he's still in his car. He's parked just close to those tents that we saw earlier, where officials and loved ones, close ones, are just gathered and waiting. We suppose that the protocol is that he probably will come out and greet the various village chiefs, kings, and other officials who have come here to greet him and to welcome him. So he will probably say hi and thank you to every single one of them before he departs from the airport.
So it sounds like a little bit of a mixed bag, right, Hanan? Because on the one hand, you have the current president, his rival, Alassane Ouattara, making available the presidential pavilion, honoring Gbagbo as a former head of state.
Yeah.
And on the other, you were reporting on the fact that there had been tear gas earlier.
Yes, I think mixed bag is the accurate expression for what's been going on today, really, because indeed you have this official welcome, this greeting party, if we can call it that, here at the presidential pavilion with those tents that were erected, and they're hosting about 300, 400 people who are all officials, people of a certain stature here in the country, who have come here to greet him and give him that proper welcome that I guess people of a stature deserve. Although I have to say that no minister is here in an official capacity to welcome him. So that's also a decision in itself. If you think about it. Although the welcoming committee also sent their Minister of National Reconciliation, Kouadio Counon-Bertin, who came here to also greet former President Laurent Gbagbo. As you said, however, we have reported that there have been clashes pretty much throughout the day, both right close to the pavilion where people, not demonstrators, but where partisans were really trying to get in, were really trying to be here in person, but kept being pushed back by security forces. They dispersed them with tear gas. We also heard detonations earlier, right close to the gates here. We're not sure what those detonations were exactly. Could have been rubber bullets, but we can't say that for sure. And earlier in the morning, there were also clashes reported a little further around the roundabout before you get into the airport area, where again crowds were dispersed by security forces. So definitely a mixed bag here.
Véronique Tadjo, as we're speaking, we're watching live images of what we think is Laurent Gbagbo's car on our monitors here, inching its way towards the exit of the. There you see those images of the presidential pavilion at Félix Houphouët-Boigny Airport. Your thoughts on the way the day has unfolded so far?
Well, I would say that definitely, just as I said earlier, there has been some.
Hold on, let me put it. Hanan. I'm sorry. I'm going to put it to Véronique Tadjo.
Yes, what I wanted to say is that there's no surprise, really, because it was bound to be a day of intense passion, because there are really high expectations. And when you think of Gbagbo's life and as a politician, it's quite incredible. He has gone a long way. But at the same time, I think this kind of intense passion, as I said, shows that the country is still extremely divided, and it shows that reconciliation has not happened, and it's difficult not to be fearful that too much is being put on this coming back of Laurent Gbagbo. I think we have to see what is going to happen afterwards, when things will have settled down and people would have realized that now Gbagbo is back in the country, because there's always the possibilities of tension. I mean, the recent tension of Alassane Ouattara's third mandate showed that it was, it was always possible to have more depth. I mean, we had 28 people who died during the days coming to the third term election. Hundreds of people wounded, and people are still in prison. A lot of people are still in prison and not really accounted for. So it is a nation extremely divided at the moment.
Yeah, and supporters of Laurent Gbagbo have been using a hashtag which is trending, Véronique Tadjo, which is Gbagbo Day. In this sense, it's interesting, that hashtag, because you get the sense that they feel like, well, this is their day, and that they haven't had that in a long time. And your thoughts on the fact that, again, why does it have to always be so tense in Ivory Coast?
Well, it's really a story of kind of the failure of the political elite to tell you the truth. I mean, it's known that you have the same people coming back, and for like several decades now. I mean, you're talking about Alassane Ouattara, Laurent Gbagbo, Bédié, and also, Soro. But this is the problem with Ivory Coast, is that there seems to be the impossibility of a renewal, of a new, I'm not talking even in terms of age or generations, but new people with new vision. And this is not happening, because in fact these huge politicians, these huge personalities are kind of putting their weight on the country and preventing it from finding a liberation day. And for me, I need to see more before I can rejoice and think that this is a liberation day.
Maxime Ricard, listening to Véronique Tadjo, do you get the sense that Ivory Coast's problem is ethnic, regional, or is it, as she put it, these three personalities that have been there, front and center on the political scene for more than a quarter century?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that in Ivory Coast there is one aspect that is not there is not a lot of mention of it, is the generational conflicts between the youth and the elders. And I think that in the next few years in Ivory Coast, it's something that is going to be really important.
Because let's just remind our viewers, Laurent Gbagbo, 76 years old. Yeah. The current president, Alassane Ouattara, 78 years old. Yeah. And Henri Konan Bédié, born in 1935, so let me do the math, he's in his 80s.
That's right. So basically, I think a lot of Ivoirians are tired with this generation that emerged during the post-colonial era. And they want definitely change. Most of the youth in Ivory Coast is feeling left out, even after 10 years of economic growth. And they definitely want some change of direction at some point. The question is that, does Laurent Gbagbo can embody this change? In a sense, he can say that he is a figure of the opposition, and that he represents some form of also of left politics that he was representing during the 2000s. But on the other hand, he's the figure, he symbolizes the conflict of the 2000s. So the question is whether does Laurent Gbagbo will try to run again and try to embody this change, or will he try to build a coalition, an opposition that is able to counter the RHDP, the political party
alliance
power
that backs
since 2011.
All right. We could join by telephone Achille Comoé of the advocacy group Planète Paix, Planet Peace. Thank you for being with us from Abidjan.
Yeah, thank you.
Let me just ask you, you just heard there Maxime Ricard talk about a difference in generations. Now, we seem to hear that at every presidential election in Ivory Coast. Oh, this time there'll be a passing of the baton, and it never happens. Why?
Are they changed for the will come over it again?
I was asking you if you can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
I was asking you, why is it that you have these three figures that tower over politics in Ivory Coast now for more than a quarter century, and there isn't a new generation?
Yeah, I think that it will be very important to pass the power to the new generation. But what is critical in Ivory Coast is social cohesion and reconciliation. And I think that Gbagbo Laurent in Côte d'Ivoire now, it will be a step forward to reconciliation and cohesion. And I think that the power should also allow the other people which are in exile to come back in order to sit down and discuss things and settle matters. I'm talking about Mr. Soro Guillaume and those who are in exile. And after that, I think that the new generations will struggle or fight in order to get in power. I'm talking about Soro Guillaume, Kakabe, and Charles Blé Goudé.
Right. So just to remind our viewers who don't know all of these figures, there are those who are still in exile. We talked earlier about those that are still in prison. And again, it's the big question we're asking in this show as to whether or not the return of Laurent Gbagbo is to try to cool the political temperature. Alassane Ouattara, the current president, signed off on Laurent Gbagbo's extradition to the ICC in 2011. But as time passed, Ouattara's position evolved. By the time Ivory Coast's current president had decided controversially that he was eligible under the new constitution to run for a third term, he was opening the door to Gbagbo's return. Here's Ouattara in the run-up to last October's election, speaking to France 24 and Radio France International.
I want Laurent Gbagbo to come back under normal conditions. He's been convicted here. He's facing trials here. He's a former president, and he's been over there for 9 years. I think it's time he came back to Ivory Coast, but that can only be done in conditions which have been examined and agreed upon. That would strengthen my desire to bring him back.
Véronique Tadiot, the question that many are asking is, what's your reaction when you hear Ouattara's words? Is there what's in Ouattara's interest here?
Okay, I just want to say first something about this idea of generations, that if you give the power to younger people, it will automatically do something good. I'm not quite convinced about that. I think that it's a question of vision. It's a question of looking at the collective good, as opposed to looking at the age of a candidate on an ID and a piece of identity. I think it's important that if we're going to go the reconciliation route, that we look at people who have shown an interest in the nation. Above individual interest. I think that probably Alassane Ouattara is in a very difficult situation at the moment, because you have the sense that one wrong move and there's a possibility of tensions coming back. So everybody will have to be very careful and walking on eggs, really, because it's you can feel it. You can feel that it's there. It can come up, because in fact Gbagbo's followers, the Gore people, have been very angry and frustrated for about 10 years, more than 10 years. So you can imagine what it means. And definitely there will be the need of strong diplomatic skills.
Veronique, we're going to have to take a very quick break as we see the cheering crowds. This Laurent Gbagbo's motorcade has left the airport and is now headed towards the center of town. We'll be right back. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. Laurent Gbagbo's back in Ivory Coast for the first time in 10 years. The country's charismatic former president, against whom charges had been dropped completely at the International Criminal Court recently. Is this the sign that Ivory Coast is on the cusp of turning a new page, or will political tensions brew anew? We're talking about it with, from London, writer and artist Véronique Tadjo, whose novels include In the Company of Men. From Abidjan, Achille Komoé of the advocacy group Planet Peace, Planet Paix. Maxime Ricard, West Africa researcher at the Institute for Strategic Research, IRSEM. And France 24's correspondent Hanan Ferjani, following that motorcade as it makes its way into the center of town from the airport, and a motorcade that's already been slowed at least once, Hanan, in the short couple of kilometers since it left by cheering crowds. All right, we've lost the connection there with Hanan Ferjani. We'll try to we do have Hanan Ferjani with us. Hanan, are you on the go with this motorcade? Hanan, are you on the move with this motorcade? All right, we'll try to reconnect there with Hanan Ferjani. Véronique Tadjo, I was asking you before the break about Alassane Ouattara's decision to let Laurent Gbagbo return. We know that it sort of went in increments for Ouattara. First, he hands over in 2011 Gbagbo to the International Criminal Court. Then he refuses to let Simone Gbagbo, his wife, be extradited. And now, after all charges were dropped, making it possible for Gbagbo to return and hinting that further charges won't be pressed. Why is that?
Well, I mean, he had, in a sense, he had no choice. Gbagbo is entitled to come back to Côte d'Ivoire. He's a citizen of Côte d'Ivoire, a former president, and he has been acquitted of all the charges. So I don't see on which grounds he could have been prevented from coming back. I know that there is a 20-year sentence over his head, but let's see what Ouattara is going to do about that, because, basically there was no other way. I think that if we're going to talk about reconciliation, very quickly the issue of justice is going to be at the heart of the reconciliation process, because 3,000 people died during the civil war, and it will have to come up at some point, and something will have to be done about the victims and what has happened during those dark days. So I think there cannot be reconciliation without justice, and I think that will be at the heart of the whole process.
There can't be reconciliation without justice. We're looking at live images of Laurent Gbagbo's motorcade making its way on the Boulevard Giscard d'Estaing towards the center of Ivory Coast's largest city. Maxime Ricard, what happened? There was, remember, a Truth and Reconciliation Committee. It was with great fanfare announced after Alassane Ouattara became president. What happened to that?
It was mainly a cosmetic process. Transitional justice was used politically by Ouattara to advance political goals. And there have been very few, I will say, political will to really advance this process. Only maybe in 2018, when 800 pro-Gbagbo prisoners, civilians mostly, were...
I'm just going to interrupt you for a second because it looks like we're seeing images of tear gas alongside this motorcade as it makes its way down the Boulevard Giscard d'Estaing. I think we have the connection now with Hanan Ferjani. Hanan, tell us where you are.
François, we're really at the tail of that motorcade. We're still barely out of the airport. It was a whole hassle just to get out of the pavilion, obviously, as you can imagine. The second people realized that Gbagbo was just getting into his car and leaving, everybody started rushing, so there was some sort of traffic just getting out was pretty hectic. And then we've been seeing this line of people outside, both sides of the roads, just cheering, chanting, just showing their mood. The atmosphere is really electric, as I said earlier. We are not yet by the VGE, the boulevard that you just mentioned, and haven't seen tear gas thus far, but we are making our way there and following the motorcade as we hope we can get as close as soon as possible to the headquarters where he'll be stopping by the former HQ of his campaign.
I can confirm to you that is indeed tear gas that we're seeing on those live images. Yeah. Just better roll up the window when you get to that point, Hanan.
Yes, yes, it will.
We're seeing young people out in the streets who are coming out to cheer. And that also is something to talk about. Again, Maxime Ricard, it's, we were talking earlier about, you have to pass the baton on to a new generation. Véronique Tadjot skeptical that, if you just change people because of their age, it won't make much good. What's your reaction when you see that the people out cheering there loudly are mostly young people?
Yeah, of course. I think Véronique Tadjot is right that just changing the face of somebody younger cannot definitely change Ivorian politics. There is a need to change the practices of politics. Clientelism, impunity are real issues that have been to be tackled in Ivory Coast. However, I think that there is a big reservoir of youth in Ivory Coast that want at some point some political change. And I think that 2015 was an election without not real stakes, political stakes. And the 2020 election was locked by the current power. So there is a thirst for change in the political body in Ivory Coast.
A thirst for political change. Achille Comoé, we saw what we thought was perhaps a cooling of the political temperature after that presidential election that was marred by some violence, as Véronique was pointing out earlier. You had the opposition for the first time in a long while taking part in the process, contesting seats, and now this return of Laurent Gbagbo. But, this process that we're talking about of a reconciliation, of confronting head-on, of accountability. Can it happen with the current leaders there?
Yeah, I think that they have no choice, but they should reconcile. Because with that reconciliation, we cannot talk about sustainable development in Ivory Coast. And if things stay like this, we will experience war, which will not arrange matters in Ivory Coast. And I think today each party both parties should sit down together and discuss the critical matters of Ivory Coast. I'm talking about education. I'm talking about the electoral management body, because most of them do not agree about this institution. So that we should see a very interesting, a very democratic institution like that will, organize our election. Because in Africa, generally and particularly in Cote d'Ivoire, when talking about election, people fear about that. And because they don't trust the the electoral management body. So we should try to set all these things at that level. And we should also talk about our infrastructures. That if Gbagbo, if Bédié and Alassane are not ready to sit down around a table and discuss all those things, I think we're going to experience again, conflict, which is not good for Ivory Coast. And I think that Gbagbo is talking about reconciliation. Alassane also is talking about reconciliation, and Bédié also. That there is another, political personality, which is Sorodium. Sorodium also should come to Côte d'Ivoire. Alassane should let him come, and if all of them come together and they talk to one another, I think we'll get reconciliation and will reinforce social cohesion in Côte d'Ivoire. Because this is the main, the critical thing in Côte d'Ivoire: reconciliation.
Right. Let me ask on this, Véronique Tadjo, bringing all those leaders, including Guillaume Soro, was pushed out into exile before the last presidential election. Would that be, as you just heard there, Achille Comoé describe it, the starting point?
Well, yes, there's no doubt that there's the shadow of Soro hanging over all this. But what I want to say is that if we could come to a solution where those who sit down, the three main politicians who sit down, promise us, guarantee to the Ivorian nation that they're not going to go for another election, then I think maybe we have a chance to find some common grounds. Because if we start, if they start looking at the next deadline for the next elections, then there's going to be a game of alliances, new alliances, and all sorts of intrigues and negotiations are going to mar the reconciliation process. So what I really would like to see, and I think that will be the only way to guarantee neutrality, is that none of these politicians, that means Bédié, Alassane, and Gbagbo, and so will go for elections. Otherwise, it's going to do a pre-election campaign.
All right. For people watching this from the outside, what's kind of difficult to understand is that you think that Ivory Coast right now, we're talking about all these political tensions that are unresolved, simmering for more than a decade. Now, if it hadn't been for COVID, Ivory Coast would still have been on target for 6% plus growth last year. For 2021, it's estimated at 6.5%. It's supposed to rebound robustly. The biggest problem, in fact, is electricity supply, unable to keep up with booming demand. It's when you speak, Maxime Ricard, with people about Ivory Coast here, they don't really talk much about the political tension. They see this country that's this West African powerhouse. It's incredible to think that they it's as if they're not the same country at all.
Yeah, it's a really uneven economic growth. Of course, there has been some real improvement in terms of investments in public infrastructure, for example.
The World Bank says that the number of people in poverty has dipped from 45% 5 years ago to 39%. That's quite a sizable improvement.
Yeah, no, there has been some improvements for sure. But the thing is that, for example, in rural areas, the cocoa, etc., all the primary commodities, the prices are low. Agriculture's farmers have difficulties making ends meet. I've done field research in Western Ivory Coast, and I could see that, I could hear that from people. And so,
is that the subtext to the tension we've been talking about on this show, or is the subtext simply these leftover rivalries and simmering tensions from before?
Yeah, I think that these politicians are trying to connect to these issues, but so far they have not very good at it. During the 2020 elections, even if, of course, the power tried to lock the election, there was not a lot of discussion about the actual issues, the actual political programs from the opposition. So I think it's a real issue in Ivory Coast is to have political parties that are really trying to set out a plan for the future. For also the youth unemployment, because yes, we talk about the numbers. You talk about youth unemployment. If you look at the quality of the jobs that are over there for the youth, it's really bad jobs. And so, all these issues they have been to be dealt with in the future in Ivory Coast. It's not only
instead of replaying the civil war.
Yes.
Right. Now, it's we can, again, if you're just joining us here on France 24, we've been watching live images of the motorcade of Laurent Gbagbo, first time back in the country after 10 years. It's hard to believe that we're talking about the same man who stood trial before the International Criminal Court was also the one who dared to defy the country's aging founding president, Félix Houphouët-Boigny, in Ivory Coast's first multi-party election. This was back in 1990.
You have to choose between the past and the future.
Véronique Tadjo, I almost feel like saying, will the real Laurent Gbagbo please stand up? And it's interesting when you, throughout Africa, he means different things to different people.
Absolutely. I still remember when he was competing against Félix Houphouët-Boigny, and I stood in line for the voting, and there was a lot of hope of a real change, but it was not really to be. I think there's a lot of rhetoric, but I think when you think back at the days of when Gbagbo was in power, it was a difficult time for Côte d'Ivoire. And true, he had to deal with a rebellion, and that is also something that will come up in the reconciliation process, because there's also a lot of mystery still surrounding this period. So there's a lot of silences that need to be explained. We need much more of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but this time, second time, it has to be the right time.
It has to be the right one. You're saying.
Yes, the right one.
The right one this time around, and elsewhere on the continent, Véronique, in many places, Gbagbo is seen. You mentioned that civil war as the man who defied France. They don't go into the intricacies of what happened during that civil war and the serious charges that were leveled against him.
Yes, I think that's the thing. That in a lot of people is a liberation leader, but I think it's very often it's people who have not actually lived in Côte d'Ivoire and are looking at things from abroad, and they are also thinking of France involvement in this whole affair, which was absolutely terrible, and which started, I think, a kind of anti-French movement, at least in the West African region. It's difficult to really assess what happened during the Gbagbo days when he was in power. And the thing about people in general and this human nature, they tend to forget. They tend to forget what with time, 10 years is quite a long time. They tend to forget what really were the conditions, the economic, political conditions at the time. there was a lot of tension, and this crisis goes back quite a long way.
All right. Before we end this edition, let's cross back to Hanan Ferjani. I believe the motorcade is making its way to the heart of Abidjan's business district. Tell me what you've seen along the way so far.
Well, I've actually seen those tear gas that you mentioned earlier, Francois. There have been some tear gas fired again to disperse crowds. We are seeing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of young people just on both sides of that main road on the VGE. We're just running, and police forces are just spread out pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, the tear gas doesn't seem to be dampening the mood.
I'm sorry?
The tear gas doesn't seem to be dampening the mood.
No, not at all. That's the interesting part about this. It's clearly done as an effort just to push them back and to allow for that motorcade to really advance, because we have been stuck in a way. People are just keep running in between cars, and that's making everything a little bit slower. But it's not dampening the mood at all, as you said, Francois. People are just chanting, singing, very happy. That electric mood I keep talking about is not dampening at all. It's just really, if anything, I feel like this is going to go through the night, to be honest, Francois.
All right.
Can you hear everything that's happening?
We can hear behind you. Yes, we're getting
we're
getting the cheers behind you there, and it's definitely going to continue, and we're definitely going to be covering it right here on France 24. I want to thank you, Hanan Ferjani, for your live reporting there. I want to thank as well Véronique Tadjo in London, Achille Comoé in Abidjan, and Maxime Ricard for being with us here in the France 24 debate.